Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I'm your host, Gary Parker, and today we have episode 465 for January 26th, 2026. So first of all, happy Data Privacy Week. This is, I guess, International Data Privacy Week. It used to be a Data Privacy Day, and then they made it a whole week, and it's kind of unofficial, but Stay Safe Online has a bunch of information about this with some great resources. You might want to check that out. I'll put a link in the show notes. But basically, every week is Data Privacy Week on this podcast, so I'm not going to probably do anything special. I used to be part of their champion program, but honestly, it didn't really do a whole lot. So anyway, FYI, there's some extra resources there if you want to check them out. So this is the last week for my annual listener survey. I would love to get more responses. I have gotten several. That's great. Thank you so much to everybody who's already responded. And again, there's a chance to win a free copy of my book. I'm going to give out five PDF copies of my book to random people who respond and give me some way to contact them. But otherwise, the survey is totally anonymous, and I would love to get your feedback. There's a lot of questions in there. There's a lot of different things you might be able to help me with. So check it out. You don't have to fill out everything if you don't want to, but I would appreciate as much feedback as possible. And you got one more week left to do that. If you go to fdsd.me/survey2026, that'll take you right there. And again, it's going to close at the end of the month, so you're about out of time. Also, the new patron promotion will expire at the end of this month. We've already gotten some new patrons, so that's great. If you ever wanted one of my really cool Dragon Challenge coins, this is your opportunity. I only do this once or twice a year, so if that little collectible item is something you are interested in, now is the time to act. If you go to fdsd.me/promo126, as in January of 2026, that will take you to all the information you need and let you know how it works. And also take you to some pictures of the coin and even a little video of how it works when you spin it. All right, so as I sit here, we're waiting with bated breath for the massive winter storm to roll in. Here in North Carolina, we're basically expecting all ice, which is not good. Originally, it was going to be a bunch of snow, which would have been kind of cool, honestly. I have lived here for quite some time, and I was here back in 2020 when we had the snowpocalypse, which was a massive amount of snow and way more than they were actually expecting. But generally speaking, we don't get a whole lot of snow here. In fact, until I think it was last year, it had been 3 years since we even had any measurable snow. Anyway, I have solar panels and I have a whole home battery. So I'm hoping that even if there are power outages, I will be okay. As long as they don't go for more than a couple days, I should be good. But honestly, I really have not had a chance to test that. And this is looking like it might be that test. All right, so we have a new show for you today. Lots of interesting stories on various topics. We're going to talk about a Florida age verification bill that is up for consideration. Then the UK is looking at maybe blocking access to VPNs because, shocker, they're being used to get around their age limitations. I've got another story about some rogue web browser extensions. And if you have any of these installed, you're definitely going to want to delete them. I've got a story about how a lot of very popular apps are being used to track people's locations, often even without the makers of the apps knowing, because it's using something called real-time bidding to do it. I've got another story from 404 Media related to Flock, the people that make the surveillance equipment that is being put up everywhere, and how that they are leaking data like a sieve. And there's even a website now called Have I Been Flocked, as a takeoff on Have I Been Pwned, where you can look up some police records about license plates that they are trying to track. I've got a story about an AI company who's being sued for trying to help companies secretly score their job seekers. I've got a disturbing story about how Microsoft was even able to give over BitLocker hard drive encryption keys to the FBI. And finally, a little bit of good news to end on. The Federal Trade Commission, the FTC here in the U.S., has finalized an order settling allegations that GM and OnStar collected too much data and has put some restrictions on them. And then finally, for our tip of the week, we're going to talk about another privacy-enhancing technology in my ongoing series of PETs. And today we're going to talk about a really fun technology called zero-knowledge proofs. So, lots to talk about. Let's get to it. All right, first up, this was an article that was sent to me by a listener, actually. And My guess is that things like this are happening all around the country. And so I think it's interesting to note for you citizens out there that you need to be paying attention to this kind of stuff. So let me read from this person's blog about this, and then I'll circle back to give you a little bit more of my take on these sorts of things. And this is from the Miami Tech Enthusiast Club. And it reads, as the Florida legislature begins its 2026 regular season on January 13th, we face another unfortunate challenge to our digital privacy as Floridians. What was originally presented as an artificial intelligence bill of rights for residents has become an age verification law in order to use AI chatbots. While the rest of the bill is actually quite good, today we have to oppose the AI verification bills, and he gives a list of several of them, which you can look up if you want to check the article, until or unless the age verification piece is removed. At first blush, this all seems like unreasonable pushback against an idea designed to protect kids online. We ask for IDs at bars, after all. Minors are not allowed at certain events. We understand this in the physical world, so what is the problem with verifying someone's age in the digital world? The problem is a fundamental difference in how that information is collected and used. In order for an app or service to verify someone's age online, the developers have two options. 1, use facial recognition to estimate the age of the user, or 2, require a form of identification which states the user's date of birth. In the physical world, someone briefly glances at your ID you provide, checks your age, hands back the ID, and you're done. Either you are old enough to participate in whatever the thing is, or you're not and you are denied access. In the digital world, you have either provided biometric data or a copy of vital government documentation over to another party, hoping that they will 1, delete it, 2, not use it to track, monitor, or spy on you, 3, not tie your activity on the app service to your real identity, 4, not have their best efforts undone by a data breach, and 5, hoping one day you don't live under a government that will have no problem spying on your activity with full knowledge of who you are. In the physical world, an ID check is harmless. In the digital world, it is the backbone of a surveillance state. So what does this bill say? The section on age verification can be found in the original bill of SB 482, starting on the line 256. The first line reads, and this is a quote from the proposed legislation, it says, quote, a companion chatbot platform shall prohibit a minor from entering into a contract with the platform to become an account holder or from maintaining an existing account unless the minor's parent or guardian provides consent for the minor to become an account holder or maintain an existing account, unquote. Now, a companion chatbot is defined as, quote, an artificial intelligence system with a natural language interface that provides adaptive human-like responses to user inputs and is capable of meeting a user's social needs, including by exhibiting anthropomorphic features and being able to sustain a relationship across multiple interactions, unquote. The Florida legislature's regular session runs from January 13th to March 13th. By law, the session runs for only 60 days. We have less than that to pressure our Florida lawmakers to oppose these bills or fix them by removing the requirement for age verification. This is how you can take action. And by the way, this is not really specific to Florida, so this is good advice to anybody out there who wants to push back on proposed legislation. And the techniques listed here are as follows. First, call your elected representatives in the Florida House and Senate and tell them you oppose the age verification bills, blah, 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 until or unless the age verification part is removed. Voicemails count. Find your Florida rep here and your Florida senator here. And of course, those are links. Second, email your elected representatives. Third, share the news with friends, family, and content creators that you think would cover an issue like this. And by the way, in this case, that was this person sharing that with me. 4, follow us on social media and follow news about this bill. Be ready to take some more action. And 5th, if you're up for it, set a reminder to call again the next day and the next day. And the more pressure you can put on your representative, the better. Okay, so there's more in this article if you want to read it. But this is a great example of a concerned citizen paying attention to proposed legislation in his community and trying to educate his fellow citizens. That is absolutely fantastic. And I think we should all learn from this person's example. Also, it has some really good advice for how to effectively communicate with your elected representatives. And by the way, snail mail works as well. Writing a physical letter, which nobody does anymore, often has more impact than sending an email because it shows that you actually took the time to do something. You put in some effort. So the other thing, of course, I'll say is that there are a lot of age-gating laws popping up, mainly around social media, but also around things like artificial intelligence and adult content like pornography. And these are just the beginning. If these things catch on, they're going to be applied to more and more things that whoever in power finds objectionable. It's a very, very slippery slope. A lot of times these laws are vague, and maybe that is even on purpose. So definitely pay attention to when these laws come around and make sure they're not trying to slip in some extra stuff or making it the kind of law that can be extended easily to include other types of content. EFF has a really good guide around this. And if you actually go to EFF.org/age, it'll take you to a whole bunch of articles around this topic. And it's worth reading up on. I'll try to keep you posted here as much as I can, but this is becoming a defining tactic for suppressing information, honestly. Now, I understand that there's a lot of good reasons behind it, but as they say, good intentions pave the way to hell. So we need to keep a very close eye on these sort of things. So I appreciate this person reaching out to me. I hope that they can get to the bottom of what this means, because to me that language actually sounded a little bit fuzzy, but that just means they need to tidy it up, and that's something that should change in the bill. So if you are in Florida, you should definitely check into this. Maybe go to the show notes and click on the article. But all of us need to be paying attention to these sorts of bills that are coming up, because they're cropping up everywhere, and not just in the U.S., obviously, as we're going to learn later on today. So we need to be informed and we need to get involved. So thank you to the person who sent this to me, and I wish you the best of luck on getting this changed in Florida. All right, next up, speaking of which, and we all saw this coming. I told you this was coming, but in the UK, where they have been implementing some of these kind of age restrictions, people are getting around them using VPNs. And what's their solution to that? Well, we just need to ban VPNs. And there's even more to it than that. So let me read this article, and this is from Tech Radar. Liz Kendall, the UK Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, has announced a 3-month consultation to explore further measures to improve online safety for children, including potential restrictions on VPNs. Ministers will consider action to address concerns that VPNs are being used to, quote, get around important protections, unquote. The consultation, which was announced on Tuesday, will involve discussions with parents, safety organizations, tech companies, and young people. The process will also consider banning social media for under 16s, preventing companies from harvesting children's data without consent, introducing overnight curfews, and promoting solutions to curb excessive doom scrolling. The announcement was followed by a government defeat in the House of Lords on Wednesday, where peers backed an amendment that would ban VPNs for children under 18 and force providers to implement age checks. Peers also voted in favor of banning social media for under 16s. Labor peers had urged the chamber to wait for the consultation's outcome, but others argued that the time for deliberation was over. Crossbench peer Baroness Kidron said, quote, "Consultation is the playground of the tech lobbyist, and inaction is the most powerful tool in politics," unquote. Liz Kendall has defended the consultation period. She said, quote, "Listening to different views is the right and responsible approach," unquote. And Labor MP Andrew Cooper supported the decision and highlighted the risk of children being driven into, quote, less well-regulated spaces and into virtual private networks, unquote, following government restrictions. And then it goes on to quote some other people going back and forth on whether this is a good idea or not. So I'll leave that to you in case you want to read that, especially if you're in the UK. But again, we all saw this coming because these age verification laws have so many holes. There are so many ways to work around them. The most obvious one being to use a VPN, which lets you appear to be somewhere else. In other words, pop out on the internet in a location, a geolocation that doesn't have these restrictions. And you just can't ban VPNs. They're used all over the place for totally legitimate purposes. This is just silly. And it just goes to show why these laws were never going to work. So I mentioned that the EFF has a webpage on this, and it does. Again, it's EFF.org/age. But let me just read a couple quotes from the EFF on this topic. And it says, the EFF has long warned against age-gating the internet. Age verification technology itself is often inaccurate and privacy invasive. Very true. These restrictive mandates strike at the foundation of the free and open internet. They are tools of censorship used to block people from viewing or sharing information that the government deems harmful or offensive. And they create surveillance systems that critically undermine online privacy, chill access to vital online communities and resources, and burden the expressive rights of adults and young people alike. Age-gating mandates are reshaping the internet in ways that are invasive, dangerous, and deeply unnecessary. But users are not powerless. We can challenge these laws, protect our digital rights, and build a safer digital world for all internet users, no matter their ages. This resource hub, and that's a link to the one I just gave you, is here to help. So explore, share, and join us in the fight for a better internet. So again, these things are becoming much more common. There's a lot of laws that are being rushed into place. Many of them are not well thought out. A lot of them have these age gating things that are going to have consequences well beyond what they're considering. I understand why they're doing them, but we need to find a different way to do it. So anyway, pay attention, keep track of the laws that are being proposed in your state or region or country, and let your legislators know that there's a better way to do this. All right, next up, this one's from Lifehacker, and it's another article about another set of browser extensions that have been caught doing malicious activity. And let me read this article, and I'll once again tell you how we should be careful with extensions. But this is a new one, and I'm going to list off all 17 of these extensions, so you might want to listen up in case you have installed one of these. Okay, another wave of malicious browser extensions capable of tracking user activity and compromising privacy have been found across Chrome, Firefox, and Edge, some of which may have been active for up to 5 years. The campaign, known as Ghost Poster, was identified by Koi Security in December and included 17 Firefox add-ons designed to monitor users' browsing activity. Threat actors planted malicious JavaScript code in the extension's PNG logo, and I will come back to that after the article, which served as a malware loader to retrieve the main payload from a remote server. Researchers at LayerX have found an additional 17 malicious extensions across multiple browsers that have collectively been installed more than 840,000 times. According to the report from LayerX, Ghost Poster initially targeted Microsoft Edge and then expanded to Chrome and Firefox. The malicious add-ons have been active as early as 2020 and include the following. Okay, so this is a list of 17 different browser plugins, which are also called add-ons or extensions. They have different names. But if any of these ring a bell, or if you might want to go check your browser and see what extensions you have installed, you want to remove these. And they are, in no particular order, Google Translate in right-click, Translate selected text with Google, Ads Block Ultimate, Floating Player Pip Mode, picture-in-picture, Convert Everything, YouTube Download, One Key Translate, Ad Blocker, Save Image to Pinterest on right-click, Instagram Downloader, RSS Feed, Cool Cursor, Full Page Screenshot, Amazon Price History, Color Enhancer, Translate Selected Text with right-click, and Page Screenshot Clipper. Google Translate and right-click alone had 522,000 installs. The next most popular add-on was Translate Selected Text with Google with 159,000 installs. Researchers also found a more sophisticated variant of the campaign in Instagram Downloader, which had almost 4,000 installs. Ghost Poster malware has built-in safeguards to prevent detection. For example, activation is delayed by 48 hours. And it only communicates with the remote attack servers under certain conditions. Once installed, though, the extensions that are part of Ghost Poster have the ability to hijack affiliate traffic and redirect commissions to the attackers, strip and inject HTTP headers to weaken security, bypass CAPTCHA, and inject iframes and scripts for click fraud and user tracking. The only sort of good news is that the malware doesn't harvest credentials or engage in phishing. And I'll just add to that my ubiquitous yet. While the malicious extensions are no longer available to add in Chrome, Edge, and Firefox, users who have installed them should remove them immediately as they remain active until explicitly deleted. All right, so we've been talking about this a lot lately, but I'm going to say it again. Extensions, add-ons, plugins, whatever you want to call them, these are basically applications for your browser. And they should be treated as such. They get permissions like applications get permissions. They usually ask you those when you install them or when you try to use the feature that needs them. A lot of people don't think twice about installing these extensions, and they really can get up to a lot of mischief. They have a lot of power. They can track you. They can take data from the pages you visit. They can track every page you go to. In many cases like this one, they can actually inject JavaScript code into your web browser that does bad things. You really should be very, very careful on what extensions you put into your browser. Only put in the ones that you absolutely need. Make sure you've restricted the permissions that these extensions have if you are going to keep them. Note that in a lot of cases, like in Firefox, you can disable them. Like I've got a couple that I use infrequently, and so I only enable them when I need them. All right, so real quick, let me circle back to that whole thing about malicious code inside of a PNG image. And it's really pretty fascinating, but basically what's going on here is there are ways to embed arbitrary data inside PNG images and possibly other types of images as well. But the Ghost poster uses PNG apparently. And what's going on is it's kind of like a smuggling thing. It's using the image to smuggle in this malware. And it's not even the full malware. It's just the malware loading code. But I mean, what virus checker is looking at PNG images to see if it contains malware loader code? But anyway, that's what's going on here. The PNG itself is not quote unquote infected, but the PNG is used to smuggle in code that the extension knows to look for. Because if it was actually code that was built into the extension, hopefully Firefox and Edge and Chrome would be looking at the code that's part of the extension and saying, hey, that's malware. But it's basically using this technique to get around those kind of checks and then finding its malware a different way and sneaking it inside of an image. All right, next up, this is from Wired, and it's about several very popular apps being used to spy on your location, this is something actually we've covered before, but it's just another instance of this and an update on that whole scene. Okay. Some of the world's most popular apps are likely being co-opted by rogue members of the advertising industry to harvest sensitive location data on a massive scale, with that data ending up with a location data company whose subsidiary has previously sold global location data to U.S. law enforcement. The thousands of apps included in hacked files from location data company Gravy Analytics include everything from games like Candy Crush and dating apps like Tinder to pregnancy tracking and religious prayer apps across both Android and iOS. Because much of the collection is occurring through the advertising ecosystem, not code developed by the app creators themselves, this data collection is likely happening without the users or even the app developers' knowledge. And this is a quote from Zach Edwards, a senior threat analyst at the cybersecurity firm Silent Push. And Zach says, quote, "For the first time publicly, we seem to have proof that one of the largest data brokers selling to both commercial and government clients appears to be acquiring their data from the online advertising bid stream," unquote, rather than the code embedded in the apps themselves. The data provides a rare glimpse inside the world of real-time bidding, or RTB. Historically, location data firms paid app developers to include bundles of code that collected the location data of their users. Many companies have turned instead to sourcing location information from the advertising ecosystem, where companies bid to place ads inside apps. But a side effect is that the data brokers can listen in on that process and harvest the location of people's mobile phones. Another quote from Zach, he says, quote, "This is a nightmare scenario for privacy, because not only does this data breach contain data scraped from the RTB systems, but there's some company out there acting like a global honey badger, doing whatever it pleases with every piece of data that comes its way," unquote. Included in the hacked Gravy data are tens of millions of mobile phone coordinates of devices inside the US, Russia, and Europe. Some of those files also reference an app next to each piece of location data. 404 Media extracted the app names and built a list of mentioned apps. The list includes dating sites Tinder and Grindr, massive games such as Candy Crush, Temple Run, Subway Surfers, and Harry Potter Puzzles and Spells, transit app Move It, My Period Calendar and Tracker, a period tracking app with more than 10 million downloads, popular fitness app MyFitnessPal, social network Tumblr, Yahoo's email client, Microsoft 365's Office app, and flight tracker Flight Radar 24. The list also mentions multiple religious-focused apps such as Muslim prayer and Christian Bible apps, various pregnancy trackers, and many VPN apps, which some users may download, ironically, in an attempt to protect their privacy. Although this dataset came from an apparent hack of Gravy, it's not clear whether Gravy collected this location data itself or sourced it from another company, or which location company ultimately owns it or is licensed to use it. Gravy is a company that powers much of the rest of the location data industry. It collates mobile phone location data from various sources and then sells it to commercial companies or through its subsidiary Ventel to U.S. government agencies. Norwegian outlet NRK and I previously revealed the flow of location data from a handful of ordinary apps to Gravy and then to Ventel. Ventel's clients have included the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, Customs and Border Protection, or CBP, the IRS, the FBI, and the Drug Enforcement Agency, or the DEA. Ventel has also provided the underlying data for another government-bought surveillance tool called LocateX. 404 Media and a group of other outlets showed last year how that tool, made by a company called Babel Street, could be used to monitor visitors to out-of-state abortion clinics. But the newly hacked data shows for the first time just how many apps could be part of a location data supply chain, even if their developers are not aware of it. Most app developers and companies included in the list did not respond to a request for comment. Now, at this point, the article goes on to several responses from a lot of the people that they reached out to. They kind of all boil down to, we don't know who Gravy is, but yes, we show ads. All right, so let me just finish the article. It's important that the data appears to be sourced through real-time bidding because that dictates who is responsible, rogue members of the advertising industry and tech giants that facilitate that industry, how users can protect themselves, attempting to block ads, and the fact that the massive app publishers may not even be aware that their users' data is being harvested and therefore might not know how to stop it. An app developer will know if it implemented location data gathering code itself. It might not know that some company somewhere is silently listening in on the advertising process and siphoning data from their app. Surveillance firms can obtain RTP data by acquiring ad tech companies and posing as prospective advertisers. The spy-run location data company doesn't need to successfully place an ad. Instead, it is able to gather data on devices by simply being plugged into that industry. Location data in this case can also include a user's IP address, which is then geolocated to give their course location. Last January, 404 Media reported on an Israeli surveillance company called Patterns, with a Z, which was sourcing masses of location data through the RTP process. In an exposed training video, Patterns showed some of the popular apps it got location data from. Every one of these apps were also in the Gravy data. This suggests that Gravy, or wherever Gravy got that data from, also sourced it from interacting with advertising systems rather than location tracking code baked into the apps. In December, the Federal Trade Commission banned another location data company called Mobile Walla from collecting consumer data, quote, from online advertising auctions for the purposes other than participating in those auctions, unquote. In other words, the agency banned Mobile Walla from participating in the RTP process for building datasets on people's devices. The FTC also said Ventel and Gravy collected data without obtaining user consent, ordered the company to delete historical location data, and banned it from selling data related to sensitive areas like health clinics and places of worship, except in quote-unquote limited circumstances involving national security or law enforcement. Okay, so this is a very long article. I just kind of give you the highlights there. But this has gotten really out of hand. And I interviewed Dr. Johnny Ryan several years ago about the real-time bidding process and how much data it was leaking at that time. And it's only gotten worse. And as companies like Apple have implemented things like app tracking transparency, where you have a single button in your settings to say, I don't want to be tracked, that all the apps on your phone must respect. And as we've started to block third-party cookies by default in a lot of cases, the advertising industry just can't help itself. It wants to know everything it can about you and has been used to having access to all of that data and is scrambling to come up with any way it can to replace what it's losing in these other areas. And real-time bidding right now is a prime target. And again, real-time bidding, this is the case where your app wants to show ads because it wants to make money. So it contracts with a third party saying, hey, I want to make money from ads on my app. Here's some banner locations or whatever in my app, places you can place ads. You place the ads, you do all the work to place those ads, and then just send me a check. And behind the scenes, whenever you launch an app or go to a web page that has these ad spaces, behind the scenes, there's this real-time bidding process where it automatically, electronically sends out these auction notices to anybody who might want to place an ad for somebody with these demographic characteristics, conducts the auction in milliseconds, and then the winner gets to show their ad. But everybody else who bid on that ad space got the information about that person. And what a lot of these tracking companies have figured out is They don't have to actually place any ads. They just have to participate in the auction. And then they get access to all of this data. So that is what's going on here. And again, it has really gotten out of hand. It is a major loophole that has been exploited to ravage our privacy, and we need regulations on this ASAP. So what can you do about this? You need to try to block ads as much as you can. So first of all, I wouldn't use Chrome as a web browser, or Android, I guess, if you can help it. But, use privacy-respecting browsers that have built-in ad blocking like Brave or Molvad or Firefox. Use uBlock Origin, which is, again, that's one of like the 4 extensions I have on my browser. It's a lot harder to block ads on your phone, especially an iPhone. There are some ad blockers. I don't know how well they work. You could try using privacy-respecting browsers on your phone. Unfortunately, a lot of apps, when you click links, open their own browser and not your browser of choice, which bypasses all your protections. And what I do, and this strikes a little bit more at the root, is using NextDNS, which can block a lot of ads and tracking. At a very high level, you can put this on your router so that all the devices in your home are using NextDNS for DNS. You can also set the DNS provider for your mobile devices like your smartphone and your laptops and your tablets, so that when you're accessing the internet outside of your home, it's still, doing its best to block these sources of ads. And of course, if you have an iPhone, you should definitely turn on app tracking transparency. If you go to settings and go to privacy and security and then tap tracking, there's one big button at the top that says allow apps to request to track, and just turn that off. And this is another article about Flock. They have been all over the privacy news. This is from 404 Media. A handful of police departments that use Flock have unwittingly leaked details of millions of surveillance targets and a large number of active police investigations around the country because they failed to redact license plates information in public records releases. Flock responded to this revelation by threatening a site that exposed it and by limiting the information the public can get via public records requests. Completely unredacted Flock audit logs have been released to the public by numerous police departments, and in some cases include details on millions of Flock license plate searches made by thousands of police departments from around the country. The data has been turned into a searchable tool on a website called haveibeenflocked.com, which says it has data on more than 2.3 million license plates and tens of millions of Flock searches. The situation highlights one of the problems with taking a commercial surveillance product and turning it into a searchable connected database of people's movements and of the police activity of thousands of departments nationwide. It also highlights the risks associated with relying on each and every law enforcement customer to properly and fully redact identifiable information anytime someone requests public records. In this case, single mistakes by individual police departments have exposed potentially sensitive information about surveillance targets and police investigations by other departments around the country. Flock is aware of the exposure enabled by its own product design and has tried to do damage control with its law enforcement customers by blaming, quote, increased Public Records Act or FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, activity seeking by the public, unquote, according to an email Flock sent to police obtained by, you guessed it, public record request. Flock has threatened Chris Van Pelt, the creator of Have I Been Flocked, by going after his web hosts and claiming that he has violated their intellectual property rights and is posting information that, quote, poses an immediate threat to public safety and exposes law enforcement officers to danger, unquote. In recent weeks, Flock severely limited the amount of information available on its audit logs, which are designed to be a transparency tool, raising questions about how much information journalists, regulators, and government agencies will be able to get about police use of Flock cameras in the future. And this is a quote from Van Pelt, the guy who created this website. It says, quote, I have set up Have I Been Flocked to show how pervasive and prevalent this monitoring is and to show just how many searches are getting done. That information by itself is shocking. And then he says again, to me as a private citizen, that's shocking. And I think that's kind of what Flock is trying to hide or bury, unquote. And Van Pelt said he is committed to keeping the website online. And as 404 Media has reported before, Flock's automated license plate reader cameras are connected to local, state, and or national networks of cameras. When a police officer runs a search seeking the locations of a specific license plate, they are usually not just searching cameras owned by their own jurisdiction. They are usually searching all flock cameras in that state or in the country. Each individual search creates a record of that search on as many as 80,000 different cameras around the country. As a compliance and transparency measure, these search records can be obtained through a search audit, which are essentially huge spreadsheets of specific flock searches that contain not just the searches of local police, but of all police who have ever searched that camera. Using this data, we have previously been able to report that local police are regularly giving Immigrations and Customs Enforcement side door access to flock cameras, and we also reported that Texas searched tens of thousands of cameras nationwide for a woman who self-administered an abortion. Flock search audits have also been used to catch police who have allegedly illegally stalked people or otherwise abused the system. Because these search audits are important tools for police transparency and accountability, they have become a popular type of public record to request for journalists, concerned citizens, privacy experts, city councils, and government regulators. In the vast majority of cases, the police departments releasing the search audit files redact the surveillance target's license plate number. But in recent months, at least 4 police departments have released full flock search audits without redacting anything at all, revealing information about a mix of more than 1 million individual surveillance targets, suspects, and crime victims. This means that any individual flock customer could accidentally leak the specific search targets for millions of flock searches nationwide. Any single failure point anywhere in the country could dox the police activity and surveillance targets of other police departments elsewhere. With the license plate information, you can determine not just what police are searching flock for, but who they are using it against. An unredacted search log obtained by 404 Media shows that more than 700,000 individual searches from June 2025 alone, performed by hundreds of law enforcement agencies nationwide, including hundreds of searches performed by U.S. Border Patrol agents. They show the specific date and time of a search, the name of the officer who did the search, sometimes show the specific case number of a search, the police stated reason of the search, I'm going to come back to that in a minute, as well as the number of flock cameras searched. Crucially, they also show the license plate, allowing someone to connect a specific license plate and therefore person to reasons like drug trafficking, fugitive, narc, immigration enforcement, homicide, oil and gas theft, etc. As the Electronic Frontier Foundation found out, they also exposed the victims of a host of biased police tactics and dubious searches, including hundreds of searches of No Kings protesters, audit log reasons that include possible gypsy, and the search for a woman who had a self-administered abortion. At first, just 1 or 2 police departments failed to do redactions. In recent weeks, however, it has become clear that many police departments are not redacting license plates. This led Van Pelt to create HaveIBeenFlocked.com, a website that collates many of these search audit logs and allows people to search individual license plates to determine if they have been run through the flock system, and if so, where and when. The number of police departments who have released fully unredacted logs has become so numerous that it can no longer be ignored, and the releases have caused Flock to drastically reduce the amount of information that can be obtained from a search audit. Rather than simply making sure that search audits exported for public records do not include license plates or are redacted by default, Flock has totally overhauled how the search logs work. In a December email to police customers obtained by 404 Media, Flock said that, quote, "To protect officer safety and active investigations, network audit logs will no longer include officer names, specific plates searched, or vehicle fingerprint information," unquote. To be clear, Flock is not turning on license plate redaction by default. It is fully withholding officer names and license plate information from the police departments themselves. And finally, they have one odd quote here from Chris Gilliard, who's a privacy expert, who says, quote, "Flock is doing their best to have it both ways, where they have no responsibility and also no accountability to the communities where their cameras are placed. Shoddy data hygiene by law enforcement is not seen as a threat or danger, but accountability and transparency are," unquote. Okay, that article is actually much longer than that, and 404 Media has been doing a ton of reporting on Flock, which has been great. In the article, there's a lot more stuff in there about trying to shut down the Have I Been Flocked site and all the different legal cease and desist and intellectual property stuff and various other techniques that they've been using to try to bring this site down. The EFF has looked at this stuff and calls all of these things bogus. And as I record this, that site, Have I Been Flocked, is still up. There's a link in the show notes if you want to check it out. And you should. But I'm worried that the site will eventually be shut down. So if it's something you would like to look at, you should probably do it sooner rather than later. I did look for my license plate, by the way, and it was not in there. And frankly, I didn't expect it to be, but it's really simple. Just put in your license plate and hit return, and it will show you if you showed up in any of these logs. You probably haven't. But if you have, let me know. I'd be curious to know. But again, this is just another example of how all this rampant data collection can backfire, often in completely unexpected ways. This is basically the tools being used as designed, and the cops who are responding to Freedom of Information Act requests and public records requests, of which they must comply, have not been taking the time to redact the information, the privacy information, like the license plate numbers, in their responses. And by the way, I said I was going to come back to this. There's a picture in the article that shows some of the spreadsheets, and one of the columns was the reason. And the article gave you some reasons that sort of make sense, but some of the other ones in there, and by the way, there were definitely plenty of empty ones. Like, you don't have to give a reason, apparently. But like some of the reasons, like 2 of them in the picture alone were, and I say, quote, sus, as in suspicious. That was the reason. Some of the other reasons that were in this picture that they gave were investigate. Like, what does that mean? One was crim, not crime, crim. Anyway, I will say one more thing. 404 Media's done some great stuff, but one of the things they do that they might not expect is they actually periodically give seminars on how to do Freedom of Information Act requests. I attended one of them a long time ago. This is something that any one of us can do. This is something, as a citizen, this is your right. And honestly, I want to do some FOIA requests myself. I've never done them, but I've been wanting to do it for a long time just so I could learn the process. So I'll try to find a link to that seminar and put it in the show notes. All right, next up, another AI-related article, and this one's from Reuters, and it's about AI being used to screen employment candidates without their knowledge. Eightfold AI, a venture capital-backed artificial intelligence hiring platform used by Microsoft, PayPal, and many other Fortune 500 companies, is being sued in California for allegedly compiling reports used to screen job applicants without their knowledge. The lawsuit filed on Tuesday is the first in the U.S. to accuse an AI hiring company of violating the Fair Credit Reporting Act, according to the law firms that filed the case, and shows how consumer advocates are seeking to apply existing law to AI systems capable of drawing inferences about individuals based on vast amounts of data. Santa Clara, California-based Eightfold provides tools that promise to speed up the hiring process by assessing job applicants and predicting whether they would be a good fit for a job using massive amounts of data from online resumes and job listings. But candidates who apply for jobs at companies that use those tools are not given notice and a chance to dispute errors. Job applicants Aaron Kistler and Shruti Baumik allege in their proposed class action suit. Because of that, they claim Eightfold violated the FCRA and a California law that gives consumers the right to view and challenge credit reports used in lending and hiring. And this is a quote from their lawsuit application. It says, quote, "There is no AI exemption to these laws, which have for decades been an essential tool in protecting job applicants from abuses by third parties, like background check companies, that profit by collecting information about and evaluating job applicants," unquote. Eightfold spokesperson Kurt Fuller said the platform operates on data shared by candidates or provided by customers. And Fuller says, quote, "We do not scrape social media and the like. We are deeply committed to responsible AI, transparency, and compliance with applicable data protection and employment laws," unquote. Eightfold creates talent profiles of job seekers that include personality descriptions such as team player and introvert, rank their quality of education, and predict their future titles and companies, according to the lawsuit. Kistler applied to roles at several companies that use Eightfold, including PayPal, and Baumick applied to companies including Microsoft, according to the complaint. Both hold science or tech degrees and have more than 10 years of experience. Neither was hired, and both believe that Eightfold's tools played a role. Okay, so this is just another example of how AI is being used to make all sorts of very serious decisions. It's being used in hiring and firing, And when I say AI in this case, I'm loosely talking about algorithmic things. But it's been used in the sentencing of people convicted of crimes, making parole decisions, approving loans, and much more. These things have very serious consequences in these people's lives. Now, sometimes there is a mandatory human review process, a human in the loop on these decisions. But the reason AI involved is probably because the human can't handle the volume of what it's being asked to do. A human cannot review 1,000 resumes. Not well. So the human gives it over to an AI system who reviews all these resumes and then looks at the cherry-picked ones that, it thinks are going to be good. So that means that all the people that were rejected not by a human, even though supposedly there's a human involved in the process. And there's a lot of laws around making people aware when these kinds of tools are being used to affect their lives in a significant way. And in particular, the Fair Credit Reporting Act, which, was brought on because people were using people's credit records to make hiring and firing decisions. And basically, it's been a while since I've looked at this, but as I recall, the FCRA had provisions in it that if you're using this data to make important decisions about somebody like hiring and firing or giving them a loan or not, then you're subject to the Fair Credit Reporting Act. Even though it says credit in the name, it's not just about credit. And so that's why so many people search sites that have all this data about you make a big point when you go to the site and you search on something saying, you swear by using the site that you are not using this to make decisions about this person. And that's the way they get out of being subject to the FCRA. But that's obviously not good enough because people are using it for that purpose. And you can't just tell people that, by continuing to use this site, you let us off the hook by telling us that you pinky promise not to use this to make decisions about people. Now, there are other laws being proposed and are popping up that are trying to address this, and that's a good thing. But we need a lot more transparency about when AI tools and algorithms in general are being used to make decisions about people, because they do get things wrong and people need to be aware that that's happening and need to be presented with the results, particularly when it doesn't go in their favor, and have the chance to point out when errors are made, or at least to understand what it is that was negatively impacting their ability to get a loan or get a job or whatever. All right, this next one is just mind-blowing, and I was not really aware of this, so I'm really glad that it's being brought to our attention, and hopefully this is going to get a lot more scrutiny, and it might help us learn some other things about other companies as well. This one in particular is about Microsoft and BitLocker. BitLocker is Microsoft Windows tool that allows you to encrypt your hard drive, and the whole point of encrypting your hard drive is to keep that data private, and so that anybody besides you can't read it. Unless, as this article states, Microsoft just gives away your encryption keys. All right, let me just read this article and then I'll say more. Early last year, the FBI served Microsoft with a search warrant, asking it to provide recovery keys to unlock encrypted data stored on 3 laptops. Federal investigators in Guam believe the devices held evidence that would help prove individuals handling the island's COVID unemployment assistance program were part of a plot to steal funds. The data was protected with BitLocker, software that's automatically enabled on many modern Windows PCs to safeguard all the data on the computer's hard drive. BitLocker scrambles the data so that only those with the key can decode it. It's possible for users to store those keys on a device they own, but Microsoft also recommends BitLocker users store their keys on its servers for convenience. While that means someone can access their data if they forget their password or if the repeated failed attempts to log in lock the device, it also makes them vulnerable to law enforcement subpoenas and warrants. In the Guam case, it handed over the encryption keys to investigators. Microsoft confirmed to Forbes that it does provide BitLocker recovery keys if it receives a valid legal order. And this is a quote from Microsoft spokesperson Charles Chamberlain, who said, quote, "While key recovery offers convenience, it also carries a risk of unwanted access. So Microsoft believes customers are in the best position to decide how to manage their keys," unquote. He said the company receives around 20 requests for BitLocker keys per year, and in many cases, the user has not stored their key in the cloud, making it impossible for Microsoft to assist. The Guam case is the first known instance where the Redmond, Washington company has provided any encryption key to law enforcement. Back in 2013, a Microsoft engineer claimed he'd been approached by government officials to install backdoors in BitLocker, but had turned the requests down. Senator Ron Wyden said in a statement to Forbes that it is, quote, simply irresponsible for tech companies to ship products in a way that allows them to secretly turn over users' encryption keys. Allowing ICE or other Trump goons to secretly obtain a user's encryption keys is giving them access to the entirety of that person's digital life and risks the personal safety and security of users and their families, unquote. This isn't just an issue in the U.S. Jennifer Granick, a surveillance and cybersecurity counsel at the ACLU, noted that foreign governments with questionable human rights records also demand data from tech giants like Microsoft. And she said, quote, remote storage of decryption keys can be quite dangerous, unquote. Law enforcement regularly asks tech giants to provide encryption keys, implement backdoor access, or weaken their security in other ways, but other companies have refused. Apple, in particular, has repeatedly been asked for access to encrypted data in its cloud or on its devices. In a highly publicized showdown with the government in 2016, Apple fought an FBI order to help open phones belonging to terrorists who shot and killed 14 in San Bernardino, California. Ultimately, the FBI found a contractor to hack into the iPhones. That's a long story. We've talked about it many times. There's a lot more nuance to it than that, but that is the summary, yes. Okay. Privacy and encryption experts told Forbes that the onus should be on Microsoft to provide stronger protection for consumers' personal devices and data. Apple, with its comparable File Vault and passwords systems, and Meta's WhatsApp messaging app also allow users to back up data on their apps and store a key in the cloud. However, both also allow the user to put the key in an encrypted file in the cloud, making law enforcement requests for it useless. Neither are reported to have turned over encryption keys of any kind in the past. And this is a quote from Matthew Green, who's a cryptography expert and professor at Johns Hopkins, who says, quote, this is private data on a private computer, and they made the architectural choice to hold access to that data. They absolutely should be treating it like something that belongs to the user. If Apple can do it, if Google can do it, then Microsoft can do it. Microsoft is the only company that's not doing this. It's a little weird. The lesson here is that if you have access to keys, eventually law enforcement is going to come, unquote. Granick raised concerns that the breadth of the information that the FBI could obtain if agents get access to data protected by BitLocker. And Granick says, quote, the keys give the government access to information well beyond the time frame of most crimes, everything on the hard drive. Then we have to trust that the agents only look for information relevant to the authorized investigation and do not take advantage of the windfall to rummage around, unquote. In the Guam case, the court docket shows the warrant was successfully executed. The lawyer for defendant Charissa Tenorio, who pleaded not guilty, said the information provided to her by the case's prosecutors included information from her client's computer and that it included references to BitLocker keys that Microsoft had provided to the FBI. The case is ongoing. Both Green and Granick said Microsoft could have users install a key on a piece of hardware like a thumb drive that would act as a backup or a recovery key. Microsoft does allow for that option, but it's not the default setting for BitLocker on Windows PCs. Without the encryption keys from Microsoft, the FBI would have struggled to get any useful data from the computers. BitLocker's encryption algorithms have proven impenetrable to prior law enforcement attempts to break in, according to Forbes' review of historical cases. In early 2025, a forensic expert with ICE's Homeland Security Investigation Unit wrote in a court document that his agency did, quote, not possess the forensic tools to break into devices encrypted with Microsoft BitLocker or any other style of encryption, unquote. Now that the FBI and other agencies know Microsoft will comply with warrants similar to the Guam case, there'll likely be more demands for encryption keys, Green said. And a final quote from Green, quote, my experience is once the government gets used to having a capability, it's very hard to get rid of it, unquote. Okay, so what's going on here? Microsoft and Apple both have full disk encryption capability. On Apple, it's called File Vault. On Windows, it's called BitLocker. BitLocker by name is a feature that's available only on Windows Pro and Enterprise. It's not supposedly available on Windows Home. However, there is disk encryption on Windows Home, is my understanding. It's not really called BitLocker, but it's kind of the same thing. But when you encrypt the hard disk, you've got an encryption key somewhere, and that key is usually encrypted again using your login for your device or your account. On Apple, it's kind of nice. Your login to the machine is actually separate from your iCloud account. On Windows, they're one and the same thing. But here's what's going on. Behind the scenes, both Apple and Microsoft don't want to deal with support calls for people saying, hey, I encrypted my hard drive. That's a great thing to do, but I lost my key and now I can't access my data. So they want to be able to say, don't worry, we've got you covered. We can help you unlock your hard drive. But crucially, Apple does this in a way that you still need to do this yourself. Like you still need to have access to your iCloud account. Apple does not have access, direct access, unencrypted access to your hard drive encryption key. It is locked under your iCloud account. So they can help you use other Apple devices or you using your iCloud account to recover your encryption key for your hard drive, but they can't give that key away. That apparently is not how Microsoft implemented this feature. Microsoft, by default, especially on Windows Home, if your computer has the hardware necessary to support full disk encryption by their standards, they will do it automatically, and they will automatically back up your hard drive encryption key to Microsoft's cloud, and they do have access to that key, and as we have just now found out, will give that encryption key up to law enforcement if provided a legal requirement to do so. The point here is that Apple has engineered themselves out of this problem. They can't give that key away, even if they wanted to. Even with a valid court order or subpoena or whatever, Apple cannot give away that key. They do not have direct access to it, but Microsoft does. Now, I use Windows from time to time, and I'm not an expert, so I'm not 100% clear on how you might go about setting your own key and explicitly not having it stored in your iCloud account. And it almost sounds from what I've read that you don't have that choice if you're using Windows Home, which most of you are probably doing if you're using Windows. So just be aware that unless you've taken matters into your own hands, that the fact that your hard drive is encrypted will not stop law enforcement, at least, from being able to get a hold of that key from Microsoft. All right, let's end it on one positive note. And this is from the Federal Trade Commission, or the FTC, and it's about data collection on cars, which we recently talked about with Andrea Amico and Mary Marwig. And this is a welcome development, and this is the kind of thing that our government agencies should be doing, and they should be doing it more often. But this is a win. So, the Federal Trade Commission finalized an order with General Motors and OnStar, settling allegations that they collected, used, and sold consumers' precise geolocation data and driving behavior data from millions of vehicles without adequately notifying consumers and obtaining their affirmative consent. Under the order finalized by the Commission, General Motors and all of its weird subsidiaries are prohibited from sharing certain consumer data with consumer reporting agencies. They are also required to take steps to provide greater transparency and choice to consumers over the collection, use, and disclosure of their connected vehicle data. In a complaint first announced in January of 2025, the FTC alleged that GM used a misleading enrollment process to get consumers to sign up for its OnStar connected vehicle service and OnStar smart driver feature. The FTC also alleged that GM failed to clearly disclose that it collected consumers' precise geolocation and driving behavior data via the smart driver feature and sold it to third parties without consumers' consent. The final order approved by the Commission imposes a 5-year ban on GM disclosing consumers' geolocation and driver behavior data to consumer reporting agencies. And it keeps saying consumer reporting agencies. Basically, these are data brokers. This fencing in relief is appropriate given GM's egregious betrayal of consumers' trust. And for the entire 20-year life of the order, GM will be required to, and it lists 4 things. 1, obtain affirmative express consent from the consumers prior to collecting, using, or sharing connected vehicle data, including sharing data with consumer reporting agencies, with some exceptions, such as providing location data to emergency first responders. 2, create a way for all U.S. consumers to request a copy of their data and seek its deletion. 3, give consumers the ability to disable the collection of precise geolocation data from their vehicles if their vehicle has the necessary technology. And 4, provide a way for consumers to opt out of the collection of geolocation and driver behavior data with some limited exceptions. Okay, I don't know if you're going to get a letter from the FTC or from GM about this if you have one of these vehicles. I hope you do. But if you have a GM vehicle, be on the lookout for this, because when it comes, I think you should absolutely avail yourself of these rights. Not only to stop them from sharing it, but to collect whatever data they already have on you. So in the end, again, it comes back. We need first and foremost transparency, because the notice and consent model is totally broken. people do not understand what information is being collected by whom and given to whom, and they are definitely not giving a clear picture of what this data could do, not in their favor. And furthermore, not giving any way to say no. So we need all that, particularly for cars. I mean, who thinks about this with their vehicle? I know you do because you listen to this podcast and I've made you aware of it, but I think a lot of people would have no idea. Okay, so now it's time for my tip of the week. And I've done a series of these in the past. I've done 2. This makes 3. But, that's a series. And I wanted to talk about some very interesting privacy-enhancing technologies. There's not always a technical solution to privacy. A lot of times we just need laws and regulations. But there are some techniques, there are some technical ways that we can do things better. And very clever ways that you might not think are even possible. And today we're going to talk about one of those. And it's called zero-knowledge proofs. And so this is actually a logic concept and a mathematical concept. And it can get really rigorous and kind of weighed down in a lot of jargon. But I got to try to make it simple. We're trying to maximize privacy, and we want to be able to prove a fact about ourselves while revealing as little personal information as possible. So there's lots of cases where we might use this, but I think the one I want to focus on today is age verification. So that's been in the news a lot. We've been talking about it a lot. A lot of these sites are requiring you to divulge all sorts of information about yourself when all they really legally need to check is whether or not you are over a certain age. Now, I did not say they need to know your age. They need to know that you are at least a certain age. That's a much different question that gives away a lot less information. And yet a lot of these other sites are having you upload your identity, like a government-issued ID, which has all sorts of information on it that has nothing to do with your age. Besides the fact that it gives away your birth date and your exact age. It doesn't need to know that. Okay, so let's relate this to maybe something simple. You want to get into a bar in the United States. In the United States, the age to enter a bar and purchase alcohol is 21 or greater. So let's say there's a bouncer at the door, and that bouncer is there to make sure that everybody coming in is of age, is 21 or more. So the classic version of this is the guy says, "Show me your ID." You whip out your driver's license, hand it to the guy. He looks at you. He looks at the license, the picture on the license, looks at your birth date. And if it appears to be you, and if that birth date puts you at 21 or over, he hands you back your license and you walk in and you get your beer. But if it doesn't really look like you, if this person thinks that maybe that's not your ID, or if the bouncer has some reason to believe the ID is fake, or if you're just not old enough, they say, "Sorry, you have to leave." But in the process, that bouncer, that human, saw your driver's license, and there's a lot more information on that driver's license, including potentially, your address, your weight, maybe your citizenship. But it's a human. He's probably going to forget that information. It's not like he whipped out his phone and took a picture of it. And so it's still not horrible. Now, we could have a little scanning machine, right? So that even the bouncer doesn't get to see that stuff. Maybe you just show him the picture, like you hold your hand over the rest of it, make sure the ID is yours. And then you have a little automatic device that scans that for that information and just gives you a red light or a green light, a thumbs up or a thumbs down. In that case, we've actually answered the one and only question we care about: is this person old enough to be here? Without giving out any more information to the person. Now, if that scanner was network connected and talks to a third party, then that you've now given that information to some third party, and who knows what they're going to do with it. But another way we could do that is we could have a trusted third party. Let's say you're at a festival and there's many different booths that sell alcohol, and they don't want to have to bother every single person to check your ID. So there's one service, maybe it's the police at the front entrance to this fair. And I've been to several of these kind of fairs, by the way, where there's one booth you go to and they say, "Okay, we're the cops. We're going to check your license. We don't care who you are, but if you're over 21, we're going to give you a special wristband that no one else has that proves that you're over 21. And you just show this when you go to any of these other booths. And so they don't have to bother checking your ID. They just look for this wristband. If you have this wristband on, you're good to go. And therefore, you're not giving away any information to these booths." So that's sort of a case of a certain type of zero-knowledge proof that involves a trusted third party. Now, the whole zero-knowledge proof thing doesn't strictly require that nobody gets that information, but you want to make sure that the person you're proving something to, who is trying to verify a fact about you, doesn't get any more information from you than is necessary, or maybe nothing. That would be the zero part. All right, so to actually get into the technical zero-knowledge proofs, There are some really interesting ways to do this. And I'm just going to show you 2 examples today that are totally contrived, but they show the kind of 2 different ways to approach this zero knowledge proof thing. And that is, I want to prove to somebody else, let's say I'm Peggy, the prover, and I want to prove to somebody else, Victor, the verifier, that I know something or I have access to some fact, and I can prove that I know that fact without actually revealing the secret. So let's walk through 2 examples here. First is the Where's Waldo, or I know that in the UK it's Where's Wally. And this is, the puzzle book where these huge pages of cartoon drawings with hundreds of people in them, at least dozens, and somewhere hidden in that image is one particular person named Waldo or Wally, and your point is to find that person. So let's say Peggy says, I know where Waldo is in this picture, and Victor says, no, you don't. And Peggy wants to prove to Victor that she does in fact know where Waldo is without giving away to Victor where Waldo is. Now, how can you do that? Well, here's one way you could do that. Let's say this is a book and you've opened the book on the table, and this book is, let's say it's 2 feet by 2 feet. And most of these books could be quite large. But anyway, we're making this up. So let's say this book, when laid on the table, is 2 feet by 2 feet. Peggy tells Victor to get out. Victor goes out of the room. Peggy gets a huge sheet of paper. Let's say it's at least 4 by 4. And in the dead center of that sheet of paper cuts a little hole. And now she adjusts that paper over the book on the table to show Waldo's face. Now, because the paper is so big, you can't tell where the book is under the paper. You can't tell where Waldo is relative to the edges of the book. So now she invites Victor back in, who looks on the table, looks at the hole in the paper, and sees Waldo's face. So Peggy definitely knows where Waldo is. That's Waldo. But because the paper is over the book, that doesn't give any information to Victor about where Waldo is in the book. If Victor leaves and she takes that paper away and he comes back in, what Peggy showed him gives him no help in finding Waldo in that image. That is a zero knowledge proof. Now here's a simpler example if you don't like that one. So let's say I have a deck of cards and I pull out a card, keep it to myself, and I look at it and Peggy tells Victor, I just drew a red card. And Victor says, prove it. Well, Peggy doesn't want to show Victor the card, so set that card aside face down, and then Peggy goes through the deck and pulls out all 26 black cards and shows them to Victor. Because a standard 52 card deck has precisely 26 black and 26 red cards, if all 26 black cards are still in that deck, then Peggy must have pulled out a red card. Now Victor now knows this, though he doesn't know which red card Peggy pulled. That is a zero knowledge proof. Okay, but let's do one more. There's another way to approach this where it's not absolutely sure, but it's statistically very likely, usually to some arbitrarily high level of confidence. And this is a little trickier to explain, especially without pictures. If you go to my website, you can see this with pictures in case this helps. All right, picture a cave. And we're going to call it Alibaba's cave. There's a single entrance to this cave. And as you walk into the cave a little bit, the cave splits left and right, A and B, path A and path B. Those paths go around, and if you're looking at it from above, it kind of looks like a circle, and they meet again at the back. And at the back of that cave, which you cannot see from the entrance, is a door, and that door has a passcode on it. Now, Peggy claims to know the passcode to get through that door. And without knowing the passcode, you cannot get through that door. So, to prove this to Victor, she says, Victor, wait outside. And she goes into the cave and picks either path A or path B. And let's say in this case, she randomly chooses path B. So she's at the back of the cave by the locked door on the path B side. And then she says, all right, Victor, come in here. And she says, all right, Victor, tell me which side you want me to come out of. And Victor says, all right, Peggy, I want you to come out of side A. Now, we know that Peggy went on side B, so the only way she can come out on the other side of this round cave is if she unlocks the door, goes through it, and comes through the other side. Now, Victor can't see any of this, because this is all happening at the back side of the cave, which is not visible to Victor. But Peggy comes out on side A. Okay, fine. You know, from Victor's perspective, what does that really prove? Well, there's a 50-50 chance here, right? Maybe Peggy was sitting waiting at the back of side A all this time. And so when he says come outside A, all she's got to do is walk forward, and she did not have to go through that door to get there. And so Victor thinks, okay, so what does that really prove? Well, tell you what, let's do this 10 times in a row. And if you could do it 10 times in a row, it'll seem much more likely that you actually do know this, because getting that right, being that lucky 10 times in a row is hard to do. In fact, we'll get to the math here in a minute. So if Peggy can repeat this process reliably without fail every single time, and we repeat this experiment, then eventually Victor's going to say, you know what? All right, the only way that you could do this without fail every time is if you know the code that lets you through the door at the back of this cave. And if you're doing the math, by the way, it's actually not too hard. So there's a 50-50 chance, so that's 0.5. And for every trial you run, to get it right every single time, you multiply 0.5 by how many trials you do. It's 0.5 to the nth power, where n is the number of trials. And so 1 in 10 is 1 over 1,024. So that's like 1 in 1,000 chance of getting it right. That's already pretty good. If you just did it 40 times, that gets you up to 1,000,000,000,000 odds for guessing it right and being able to fool Victor without actually knowing the code. So is it possible that Peggy does not really know the code and she just got lucky that many times in a row? Sure. Is it likely? No. So that's another case where it wasn't absolutely proven, but it's within a high degree of likelihood Peggy was able to prove to Victor that she knew a secret without revealing the actual secret. That is another type of zero knowledge proof. All right, well, I hope you enjoyed those fun examples. Again, go to my website to get more information on that and actually see some pictures if that will help. Firewallsdon'tstopdragons.com. And there is your news and your tip of the week. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the little zero knowledge proof explanation. I think that kind of stuff personally is fascinating. And there are limited uses for those things in the real world. But things like age verification, usually it'll come down more to a trusted third party. And as much as I don't like a lot of the implications for age verification, I think that if we're going to settle on a technical solution for that, the most private one is probably to have your phone do it. Like you would store some sort of a digital ID for your phone in your iPhone or in your Android phone in some sort of a trusted platform module or the secure enclave, as Apple likes to call it. And what that would allow you to do is say, okay, the owner of this phone is at least some age. Like, so you go to a website, it would say, scan this QR code. And so it will tell me, or your phone will tell me if the owner of that phone is over this age or not. And that doesn't give it any amount of identity about you. There's a lot of problems with age verification. Just because there is a potential technical solution to this doesn't make it a good idea. But I'm thinking that's probably where we're going to go. And so that's a sort of zero knowledge proof. And there are other ways we could use ZK proofs in other places to minimize the amount of information that we give up just to prove something about ourselves. Maybe our citizenship, or whether or not we're a student or a member of some group that's allowed to do something. So anyway, for Merlin's Musings this week, for my top patrons, and we've got a couple new ones, I'm going to talk about a recent barrage of trouble tickets that were submitted on my behalf with many different websites, most of which I had no relationship with. Honestly, it stressed me out for a little bit, but in the end, I think it was just someone being annoying. But anyway, for my top patrons, I will talk about how all that went down and how I investigated that. Looking down the road, next week, we're going to have an interview with Bob Lord. He was a great person to talk to. I've interviewed him once before, but I was so glad to have him back. And he's got a new project that he calls Hacklore, which is a portmanteau. It's a combination of hacking and folklore. And he basically says there are some pieces of security advice that we've been giving that really we shouldn't give anymore. So that was a great interview. Can't wait for you to hear that one. That'll be next week. And by the way, Bob, one of his many roles in his career has been the CISO, or the Chief Information Security Officer at Yahoo. And the interview I'm going to be doing after Bob is the current CISO of Yahoo, Sean Zadig. That was also a great talk. So those are the interviews that are coming up. I've got plenty more in the pipeline, including that mini panel discussion on surveillance pricing, and a talk with the CEO and founder of Freely, a new cellular carrier who's trying to make cell phone service much more private. All right, we're already running along, so let me cut it off here. I hope everybody survived this winter storm in the U.S. And until next week, as always, stay safe out there and don't get caught with your drawbridge down.